So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Entrepreneurship 101. Carrie can't be with us tonight. She's up north working with one of our northern regional innovation centers on their education programs. So she unwisely said I could introduce myself. My name is Tony Redpath. I am the VP Partner Programs here at Mars. Most of you were here last week, so you've heard all about me, so I'm not going to say anything else. For those who weren't, you can go to the Mars website. And I appreciate those who have come out in the rain. Always good to see dedicated attendees. Tonight's lecture, nuts and bolts of starting a business. This is going to be an attempt to quickly take you through some of the logistics around actually getting your business up and running and some of the practical things that you're going to encounter in doing that. I'm not going to attempt to be exhaustive, but I'm going to provide a lot of links in what will get posted to places that have a lot more information. So I'm going to go and sit down since I don't do too well standing up. If I have two mics on, it's either figure out how to cut down the beard noise by having two mics, or I shave. And since I haven't shaved in 30 years, I'm hoping that the two mics work. So I do apologize. Last year, as I was standing up here, I could hear the going on. So the guys at the back are going to try and help get a little cleaner sound today. So, nuts and bolts. I want to take the approach that what you're really doing is two things. One, you are creating a little mini ecosystem for your company, okay? Not only that, you have to fit into a larger ecosystem. And in the analogy with natural ecosystems, you're fitting in. There's going to be folks who want to eat you, and you're going to eat other folks. There's competition. You will have customers. You will be competition for others. You have to elbow your way in there and earn a space to exist. To do that, you have to create your own mini ecosystem. And one of the key messages that in this whole lecture is you can't do that all by yourself. I'm going to walk you through how you can draw on others. If you try to do this all by yourself, I think you're really hampering yourself. I'm going to try and prove that to you. So, what is your ecosystem? Well, it obviously involves your customers and your suppliers. It does involve government, trust me, and we'll get there. It involves regulatory bodies, it involves trade associations, but let's start from the beginning. Okay, here's you, Inc., and your customers. And there's one message that you will get from this course is that yellow box with your customers is the single most important box you need to be worried about. Without customers and paying customers, right, and this is fairly obvious, but, your company is nothing without them. People say, well, why do most startups fail? They fail because they don't get people who will pay for what they're trying to do. A lot of what you're going to hear in other lectures is about finding, managing, and servicing those customers. So that's the starting point. And to go along with customers, yes, you have suppliers. Okay, so at its core, you're going to buy stuff from folks and then in some manner add value and provide it to your customers. Well, so you're going to incorporate. Why do you incorporate as opposed to doing this on your own? Companies are called limited, ABC limited, because incorporation is for a limited liability corporation. And it's that limited liability. If you do something as you and you screw up, someone can go after you and all your assets. When you incorporate, you create a separate entity that is legally a person, and you as a shareholder are shielded from the liabilities of that corporation. Now, there are ways that, if you do criminal things and that, obviously you cannot hide from that. But a corporation is a vehicle for you to provide services with a buffer between you and the rest of you personally and the rest of the world. It is a vehicle that other people can invest in. They're not going to buy a piece of you, but they can buy a piece of your company. So that's why one incorporates, and we do have a whole lecture about governance and incorporation and structural issues. But I'm assuming that, as many of you from other lectures I've seen, you put your hands up. You likely are incorporated. You may have already met some of these challenges. You can incorporate federally. The relevant legislation is the Canada Business Incorporations Act. Industry Canada has a great website, Canada Business, and those are links that you'll be able to get at from the slides. Word of caution, the Canada Business Corporations Act is about a 2 megabyte PDF download. And there's no pretty pictures to make it that big. That's all dense text. I would strongly advise against trying to read that. Okay? Not only that, but I didn't list down here, then there's the regulations that have been issued since then, and that's about another 500 megabyte, 500 kilobyte PDF download, and that's kind of the interpretations on implementation of the Act. Now, the Canada Business website does have a simplified guide. It only runs, I was just going through it, it's probably only about 15 pages scrolling down the screen, and that's the simplified guide with links to all the different things you have to fill in. Nonprofits, and I'm going to say this is not an area I have a great deal of expertise in. There's a Canada Non-for-Profit Corporations Act, and I'll bet it's at least as long as the other one, okay? There is a handbook. There's a whole discussion of charitable status, because there's a distinction between not-for-profit and charities and the reporting requirements and so forth. You can also incorporate in Ontario. And there's a Business Corporations Act, and you can guess how long that probably is, and nonprofit organizations. There's one other option. Many of you will hear, you should incorporate in the States as well. Most people, when they incorporate in the States, operate for a Delaware corporation. It's cheap, it's easy, it's convenient. Nonprofit, again, I'm not familiar. These are some links to guides about that. My advice is, if you don't need to, don't. For a for-profit corporation, the only reason for really incorporating in the States is if you want American investors, they wish to invest in a U.S. corporation because they get all of the tax benefits that accrue that they don't get when they invest in a Canadian corporation. Government has changed rules in the past couple of years, but still many U.S. investors want to invest in a U.S. corporation. And so there are structures that can accommodate both Canadian and U.S. Co-owned structures. They're called butterfly structures, for example. It's complex. I wouldn't do it until you got a U.S. investor who says, I want to invest in a U.S. corporation. You can do it then. It's expensive, it is complex, and if you don't need to, wait until it makes business sense, okay? So all of these are a way of saying, all that government stuff, well, guess what? You're going to pay taxes. And you're going to pay federal tax, you are going to pay provincial tax, you're going to pay HST on damn near anything you do these days. Okay, so now, my first rule lesson number 1, get help. That quote that at the first bullet is from the Canada Business website. You can read that, but incorporation process can be complex. You don't need to read that 2 megabyte PDF. That's what accountants are there for. I love accountants, okay? So you and I don't have to read that. I have my own company. I called my accountant and said, what would you charge for somebody coming in wanting to set up a corporation? He said about $800, so fine. It's probably going to be between that and double that. But the beauty is they hand you a stack of papers with sign here, stickies on them, and you just sign, and everything is there. You get various numbers from the government. You get a number for your federal tax. You get a number for your provincial tax. You get an HST number. It's all there in the package. Frankly, you have a business to run. It's cost effective to let a professional take care of this. It's pretty routine, standard stuff. Let them do that so you can concentrate on getting those customers to earn money so you can pay their fees. So remember here, you're trying to build a structure for success. Don't go cheap, okay, and Band-Aid it and then regret later on that, oh, gee, I wish I'd done that or I did that wrong. It'll cost you way more to undo a misstep in order to correct it in the future than it does to get it right in the first place. So I'm saying get help. You should be able to afford this much. So this is your ecosystem. You got governments up there and you got an accountant. So it's getting a little bigger. Next steps. Okay, you've incorporated, but you may have partners. There may be more than one founder. You have employees, hopefully. If there's more than one of you, you're going to need some sort of agreement. Shareholders agreement, partners agreement. That can be one page. It can be much more complex. What you are agreeing to is who owns what, who makes what decisions. You're saying what are each person's responsibilities in your company, who owns the intellectual property, and there's a lot of other issues. And I have an example of actually an attendee here who was creating his company, and I was mentoring him. We'd had a number of sessions, and he found a partner who was going to come in and invest. I said, it's great. So he said, could he bring him in for a session? I said, that's great, good. So it was about 6 or 6:30 because they both had jobs, and sat down, and I said, good, okay, so what do you guys, who's going to do what? And in the course of 1 hour, I actually just kind of sat back and watched a potential partnership unravel in front of my eyes. Because the guy with the technical idea was sort of saying, well, no, I'm going to control that. No, I will do that. And the guy who was going to bankroll it was saying, well, but I expect to have a say. They hadn't really discussed this whole issue of responsibilities and decision making. And I just shut up after a while and just let it go. And they literally walked out of there and said, fine, goodbye. So why do you need a shareholders agreement? You have that discussion, and if it's going to fall apart, you do it before you got married. It's a little bit like a prenup. You might as well find out that you're not compatible and you're not in agreement about what's going to happen before you both invest a lot of time, or you all invest a lot of time and money. Okay? Assignment of intellectual property. In the VC fund I was with, we once backed a company for founders And after about 6 months, one of them fell out with the other 3 and said, I never assigned my piece of the intellectual property. I'm out of here, and I have a right to do with that whatever I wanted. Fortunately, that was all papered, and he had, in fact, assigned his IP. It didn't mean that there wasn't a fairly ugly year that ensued before he was bought out by his erstwhile friends, but it meant that the company was not paralyzed. If you have an uncertainty about who owns the assets, intellectual property or otherwise, no one's going to work with you. You go to a client, are you going to be able to provide this tomorrow? Because I understand there's a dispute. If it isn't clearly settled on paper, then a disagreement can paralyze the company and your ability to move forward. So this is why it's painful, because you say, oh, this is all hypothetical. What happens if there's 3 of you and 1 dies? Who owns those shares? Does it go to someone that he or she has assigned them to? And you find out, oh my God, they now have a 1/3 say in this. Shareholders agreements have standard rules. That why they're so thick? I joke, every time there's a clause in there, somebody had a huge blow up in a company, and ever since there's been a clause in there to prevent that from happening. And there's been enough blow ups over the years that there's clause after clause after clause. But there are rules. Okay, someone wants to exit, fine. You put your shares on the table. You have to first offer them to your partners. If they can't, then you can go. There's various levels. It's just, it's managing difficult situations. Now, everyone says, oh, no, we won't have those. We love one another. We're all in sync on this. Yes, and why are the divorce rates so high? Okay. It's perfectly analogous. And working in a small company in a tight team, there are a lot of parallels. So I'm just saying, don't think that you won't need it. If you can write it on 1 page and capture it to your satisfaction and shake hands and sign it, good. But remember, you are looking in the future. You need to say, when 2 years from now, we need to raise $5 million, do we have a robust structure that we can go out and add to? So you can guess, one more thing on this. The other agreement that you need that I touched on there is employees. When you hire, people say, oh, well, I will need to cover, what are their responsibilities and what's their salary? No, you need to cover a lot of other things. Yes, vacation, but who owns the IP? Standard rules are when you work for salary, anything you invent is owned by the company. Standard clauses. If you are hiring someone who says, well, no, I don't want to do that, that's a red flag. What? I'm going to have to buy it from you? But I'm paying you. You can guess where I stand on that subject. But get it, put it out there and say, this is my expectation. You invent, the company owns. Now, you want to put stock options, you want me to put stock options and ownership in the venture on the table? Hey, that's fair ball. But let's get clear on this. Confidentiality. Never assume that people will not talk. Make it clear that this is a high-tech business. The assets are intellectual property. They are impaired if you blab about them. Non-compete, non-solicit. These are often very touchy. If you depart, you can't compete with me for a period of time. Quid pro quo is, I will pay you for that period of time. So you are kept whole on salary. You can't go out and compete. And by the way, you can't come back in and solicit all the staff and say, hey, come and work for me. You'll do better with me. Those are, you can never stop somebody. Everybody has a right to work. You can never stop people from doing that. You can go to any lawyer and they'll have a standard small company type employee agreement that covers all those points. Don't hire somebody and not cover those off. You get moral rights on copyrights. People say, oh yeah. Oh, another perfect example, photography. You hire someone to take pictures for you to promote. Unless you word your contract carefully, you can buy the use of them, but they say, no, 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 I still own those. You need to say, no, that's my product, that's my promotional. I will pay the extra so it's crystal clear I own that. Because you don't want someone else owning what is potentially an asset. Again, nothing magic here. But you need to consider that. More taxes, of course. The moment you hire someone, you are responsible for payroll deductions, okay? Income tax, employment insurance, CPP. And like I say, when you register, you'll get all the numbers that are the requisites for submitting that information. Now, those of you who were here for Dave Dubin heard what you should never do, which is you raid those accounts before you've sent them to the government in order to meet payroll. My hair was curling as Dave was saying that. The good news is he told you the consequences after his little session with CRA when they found out that he had done that. The government considers that payroll deductions are not yours. They are the employees. The moment you paid them and you deducted tax, that was your employees' money. You don't have any right to take that or use it. Not an unreasonable position. So, I am making this sound somewhat cumbersome. It's actually not that bad. It's just that you're going to have to deal with this, okay? And another thing, the moment you hire someone, you have to register with Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. Okay? You'll pay $50, $100 minimum charge a year. You are legally obligated to do that. So, what am I going to say? You now have a lawyer in your ecosystem. Again, they do not have to be expensive. I can tell you guys gals who will do this for a very reasonable amount. They know all of these obligations. They can help make this painless. Submitting these forms, your accountant can do that. On my own company, I just send the government what I think is a reasonable amount on my payroll deductions periodically, and I rely on my accountant to adjust it all in the end. I'm not kidding you. For your deductions, they used to send out books on how to calculate the deduction, and they were tables. Those of you who did math remember log tables? These are 8.5 by 11 by a ½ inch thick. I couldn't be bothered. I make a reasonable guess, and my accountant would adjust it at the end of the year. It's cost effective, and the government's reasonably happy, and I feel, hey, listen, they got most of the money in a timely manner. It's not worth my time to bother about all of these details. I've got people who would help advise me and get me close enough for jazz. And that's my relationship with the government. That's what I feel is my obligation. I'm not working for them. I'll do as much as is reasonable, and the rest of it, I'm going to hire people to help me make certain I'm honest at the end of the year. So that's why, again, you're building for the future. You've got a good lawyer who's reasonable, who gives you just enough, who trots out standard. They don't have to reinvent this, okay? They can get you an employee contract. They're on the internet. Every good lawyer will have a standard one and can quickly walk you through what each of the terms are there for. So when you sit down with an employee, you can explain what the expectation is. This is not a big deal. I've perhaps intentionally made it seem complex to say, you know what, with a little bit of help, you can move right through this and be protected and be professional from day one. So where do we go from here? Yeah, you want to register the name, right? Again, Canada Business website has information about that. Trademarks and patents. CIPO, Canadian Intellectual Property Office, has an excellent website. And they've got some really well-written, concise documents that explain the process. Now, we do have a lecture that's coming up, I think it's after Christmas, about intellectual property as a business tool that will touch on all of these details. If you desperately need to know now, you can go back and look at last year's lecture on that subject. So I'm not going to get into a lot of details. Again, you got a good lawyer, you say, I need to register the name. What do I do? It's, yes, fill in this, what's the name, we'll do the search, bang, done. You can do it yourself. You know, you're trying to make money. Is that the best way to make money, to spend your time? You're always trading off your time and how it is best spent. As CEO, you have many things that you have to do. Offload the routine things that can be done by professionals at low cost. Concentrate on what is most important, which is getting your products and landing those customers. So, now, this is quite topical because the Jenkins report has just come out, and so this slide, I prepared this before the report came out, just scientific research and experimental development tax credits, better known as SHREDs. And SHRED can be a verb. You can have shreddable expenses. It doesn't refer to a device that chews up paper. It's a very, very good program that allows you to get money back from the tax office for expenses incurred in scientific research and development, okay? Now, you can read the wording there, must advance understanding. It's and there are changes that are being proposed. It's going to take a couple of years before they actually go through, is my guess. Basic principle is the government wants to encourage you to develop new products, new processes, new services, and is willing to give you a tax break. In the old days, it used to be, well, they kind of put that aside, and when you started making money, then you could cash in those credits. Well, that presumed that you survived long enough to make money, which often didn't happen. Now they say, hey, we'll give you cash back. Okay? You spent $1 million on shreddable expenses. You're a small company, Canadian controlled. Hey, you get back $350,000. You just submit a claim, and we give it back to you essentially within 6 months or so. Now, you have to, there's an audit. Someone comes out and says, was this real science? And then an auditor comes out and says, are the numbers right? And there's a certain amount of contention that there's some fraud and all that. I can tell you there's many, many great companies that I know that were kept alive by that flowback. I got $1 million invested. Hey, I got $350,000 to help me extend my runway in this. So I hope that they don't really gut this program, that they keep the good parts of it alive. I am mentioning it so that you are aware. To be eligible, one of the first things to say is, you know what? If you're going to do development, don't wait until you've finished it and then try to write it up. Say, lay down on a piece of paper that simply says, my objective is to develop this. I'm going to do the following. That, at its core, is a research plan and demonstrates your intent to embark on this. This is, you know, the moment you have to face an audit, you're talking paper trail. Someone will come in and say, well, how do I know you planned on doing this? You can say, no, I set out deliberately to invent and to develop this. See, here's day one, and I laid out a plan. That's what you do in a big corporation. Doesn't have to be a 50-page plan. It can just be a definition of intent. And then every month you should be writing up, what did I do? What did my staff do? And keeping track. Are we on track to these? We set out specs. How close are we? Are we floundering around? You're keeping track of this in some manner. Build it in a file. When they come out to audit, here it all is. Here's all the dollars. It still takes a while. These are so secure that after you've done one, many banks will lend you up to, I think it's 70%. Once you've had it approved, it can take several months before you get the money. There are many banks that will lend you 70% on the strength of that approval because they know it will flow through. That helps your cash flow. Again, your accountant will know how to do this. I once spent more time than I care to admit actually learning because I tried to do this myself. Take it from me. Let a professional help you do this. There are companies that specialize in, for a cut of the proceeds, they will work with you. My advice is get a good, have your accountant, make certain you got an accountant who knows how to do this and use them. They know your business anyway, they just do this as a matter of course. So, now you've got Canada Revenue Agency, shreds, it's getting crowded out there. Apologies for the little glitch in the slide. You actually start, I started off by saying customers are number one, and I've spent the rest of the time now talking about everything but that. Okay, that's the base. Now let's get back to actually building your network with customers and the more relevant groups to actually earning money. I've talked about people who will help you spend money, the government who will take it from you, and service providers who you will pay. Okay, let's get back to earning it. You need to get out with professional organizations and trade organizations. It's hard. It's easy to say, well, I'm just going to stay and hunker down and write code, or stay in the lab and do that last experiment on my molecule that I think will cure cancer. You need to be out. You need to hang out where customers hang out. That's a good sign. Where should you spend your time? Well, if you're hunting, go to the watering holes where the prey is. A little aggressive, but if you're a scientist, don't necessarily go to the scientific meetings. You should think about going to the more technical trade meetings where your clients or your customers are. The challenge there is there are too many to count. I at one time tried to look at this. There's a professional association for left-handed wingnut manufacturers and right-handed wingnut manufacturers, probably. You need to be selective. Again, you have limited time. You got to go where you really think the action is with the people you want to reach. And that's obviously true with not-for-profits. You need to be where your clients are, but you need to be out there with them. And whether that's joining a trade association, going to a show, a conference, but you ask yourself, who am I going to meet there? There's a whole skill to working a trade show. Preparing yourself, and we'll get into this on the lectures of sales and that. These are skills you, as the head of your own company, you need to know, why am I going? What do I want to accomplish? Who's going to be there? How can I use my time to best effect? So, sometimes the best investment you can make is in a couple of glasses of beer with somebody at one of these things to get them to open up a little bit maybe about some of your competition and what they're really doing. That's how you work a trade show, okay? Sometimes even just looking who's who at what booth. You can learn a hell of a lot but you got to get out there and not sit at home burnishing your wonderful product and adding yet another feature to it without having talked to the customers who may not care in the slightest bit about that last little curlicue that you've added onto your product. Get out. The founder of the first company that I ran, very wise man, who had a saying, better is the worst enemy of good. Okay? If you got something good enough for people to buy, then get the hell out there and sell it. Okay? Don't sit there and keeping for better and better, because I can make it better before I go out. Like I say, if it's good enough, get out and sell. You can always have new improved and sell twice. Okay? Partners, if you have a product or service that requires regulatory approval, you'll deal with government officials. Get to know them. Same principle, your bank. Okay, we all love to diss Canadian banks, except we don't do quite as much post the meltdown in the States. Actually, we kind of like the fact that they didn't collapse. The flip side, though, to that not collapsing, of course, is their conservative nature. They don't lend, if you remember last week about, lenders and who will and will not lend under what conditions. So get to know them, okay? This is just becoming a familiar face. You do not want to approach your bank manager for the very first time when you want to ask them for a loan. You say, who the hell are you? Well, I've been banking here for 2 years. Does anyone know you? What do you do? Sit down, make them sit down. Show them the passion that you've got for your business. Say, no, I know I'm not ready for a loan right now. I want you to know what I'm doing. I want to know if you think you can help me. Okay? Become known. Same if you're going for regulatory, you have to handle a little cautiously. Sit down, get to know them, tell them what you're doing. They may say, there are new rules coming in. Okay, I didn't know that. Don't wait. This is like gin rummy. Don't wait until you got it all. Bang, there we are. Talk to people. This is getting out. This is your ecosystem. You're out there sniffing around, finding out what's relevant to your business, okay? And as I say, with your bank, in my case of my company, I sat down with my account manager, and this was in I won't tell you how many years ago, the bad old days. We were like this. I was a chemist, and I was saying, well, just ignore the overdraft, okay? There's a check coming in next week. Trust me. She had not the foggiest idea what my company did, because I'd never told her. And in the bad old days, she frankly didn't care. If you're in an overdraft position with your bank, you know what happens. Every day, there's a computer printout of who's overdraft. Everybody, each person who's responsible for those accounts gets a reminder, what are you doing to fix that? Every day. And their job is, and if they say, he said he had the money coming in next week, so I said, fine. That's why Canadian banks are so solid. That sort of thing doesn't fly. Understand, if you understand what makes your partner tick, you have a much better chance of getting them to help you. And so do it early. You're just laying the groundwork. Again, you're building for success here. You're looking at a long-term relationship. So if they're there for you in the early days, every time you deliver, every time you sat down with someone and said, I'm going to do this by next quarter, and you go in and you say, yeah, I accomplished that, I even got further, that's a check mark on your credibility. This is a company and a person who does what they said they would. That builds confidence. There are still limits as to what bankers can do, but this is all relationship building in your network. So now you got a whole ecosystem there. Now you got your customers, and you're out there trolling around in that whole orange area where folks can help you land those customers. You got a solid relationship with your bank. You got a support team around you. You're in pretty good shape. So, and so am I with respect to time, as opposed to last week. One last thing, some things not to do. It's sometimes easier to tell people there are many ways to succeed. There's a smaller subset of very clear ways to fail, and it's easier sometimes to catalog the things not to do. This is obvious stuff. Don't get a big office. IKEA is a wonderful place. I cannot tell you how many IKEA desks I have assembled over the years. Hey, it works, okay? It shows discipline to your bank and fiscal prudence to your bank manager and to an investor. I walk into someone's shop and I see it's fancy and they're looking for me to invest. I say, where did you get the money for this? And why? You know, was this a wise expenditure of the last guy's money? Because I'm not entirely... Now, okay, don't go to the other extreme, but, you know, it needs to be good enough to get the job done in your early stages. You can have the oak desk on, you know, one of those towers on Bay Street after you've made your multi-million dollars, because you've earned it then. When you're starting out, to be honest, you haven't yet earned it, so get something that's consistent with your stage. Point 2, don't hire relatives or friends just because they're there. You need to define what you need an employee to do, and then go out and find the best possible person who can do that you can afford. So just because you've got someone who's cheap and available can be one of the biggest mistakes that you make. And I know it's hard and finding good people at a good price, but there's time and time again, think about the future. I have seen many companies when there have been really awkward moments when the company has grown beyond the, frankly, limited capabilities of a high school best friend, and the investors are saying, I'm sorry, she's got to go. She just ain't cutting the mustard. And you know it, and I know it. You got to terminate them. That's very, very unpleasant. Okay? Sometimes, I mean, okay, you're CEO of a company, you will do unpleasant things like that. It's one of the least pleasant jobs I've ever had to do in my life. But, so again, don't embark on a pathway that you know is going to end up there. We once had someone come into us looking for backing for a physics company. It was theoretical physics. His first 11 employees were going to be more theoretical physicists, and then they were going to hire a secretary. Needless to say, that is not a company that we backed. There's a tendency, I'll hire people that I understand, right? I'm comfortable with them. We speak the same language. You need to be hiring people that complement your skills, okay? And you may not be comfortable, but you acknowledge that they have skills that you don't. So that's your second point there. Hire people that you need that can grow as you do. And frankly, investors will, if you're getting investment, an investor will size you up as a CEO. And they are measuring, can you grow with this company? Some CEOs can. Sometimes it's, you know what, we're big enough. You're going to move over into the CTO, if you're techies, and we're going to hire in a new CEO. But they're sizing you up just the same way you should be sizing up a new hire. Don't assume that you have an understanding, my point about shareholder agreements, employee agreements. Witness that meeting with what my erstwhile friend thought he had as an understanding of the partner he was bringing in. There was not an understanding. Never, you walk away and people take away vastly different messages from what they thought they understood. Happens all the time. Never assume that it is there. If it's important, write it down. Then you've got words that, and at least have the battle and get something that you do agree on up front. And yes, last thing, my old chairman used to say, why bother trapping a thin mouse? I never quite understood what it meant, but if there's no money on the table, it doesn't really matter. People change when there's money on the table, okay? It's fine. Everyone's cozy as we're all working. All of a sudden, there's a lot of money on the table. People change. It's not, don't like it, but somebody gets pressure from somewhere. No, I thought I was going to get 40%, not the 25% you're saying there. And once there's money on the table, that means something. So that's why, get it in writing. It sounds, come on, trust me. No, it's just prudent business. So I think it's a short list. I'm going to leave it for questions, and I'm 43 seconds into the red light, which is, for me, not bad. So I'm happy to take questions at the microphones, please. And online, I guess, if there's anybody there.
I have a couple questions. One is about contract employees versus full-time employees when you incorporate. How long can you go with contractor or temporary employees versus full-time before you have to get them employed?
The fundamental issue, that's a very good question. Canada Revenue Agency has very clear, quite well articulated opinions on that subject. You can have a contract employee for maybe up to a year, but they have a list of tests. If you are the only person they are working for, or your company, if you provide them with space to work at, and they're not required to work off sites, if they have line responsibility, and there's about half a dozen things, you check two of those. Revenue Canada couldn't care less what you want to call it. They say you are obligated to collect deductions because you have an employee, and they are ruthless on that subject. And so, if it is and you can't say, well, it was only a 6-month contract, and then another 6 months, and then another 6 months. They're not fooled by that. We do have some old lectures online that go into that whole subject. If it's, bottom line, if it's short term, then fine, a contract is okay. If it is for a specific subset of services that they deliver kind of off-site, fine. Anything much more than that, you probably better reckon you got an employee and you have to start making deductions.
Okay, great. And just one other question is about the company logo. Do you have to get that trademarked, or do you have to register that somehow?
You can. Again, your choice as to whether it is sufficiently unique. Is there value in that for branding purposes? If there is, and you plan on using it that way, then you should protect it. It's often done in context with both a logo and words. That is a trademark, word mark. And yes, you probably then should consider protecting. It's not that expensive to do.
Thank you.
So front mic, maybe.
So just a question to clarify about the shreds, the tax credit. So it's not really a tax credit, if I understand. If I go and buy $1 million piece of high-end scientific equipment and I pay $130,000 HST on the purchase, I can get $350,000 from the government?
You have to spend on eligible expenses. And, of course, there's a long list of what's eligible. There's a longer list of what's not eligible. But if you spend $1 million of eligible expenses and you have to have spent it, then you can apply for a refund under SHRED of up to 35%. And there's some federal, there's some provincial money, but that's the rough rule of thumb. You have to be Canadian controlled and private. Larger corporations get a smaller percentage, but I doubt that applies to anybody here. Okay, go ahead.
Do you know of examples in the social sector that SHRED is able to apply, or is it morely mostly in the tech sector?
That's an interesting question. If you're incorporated as a conventional business, but one with a social purpose, which is true of many, then you could well be doing, it has to be scientific research and development, and there are clear definitions, but if you're developing a new software program that links charitable donations to advertising, with a social purpose, hey, if I'm on your case, I'm going to say, of course you can. It's, it has to be scientific research and development. The fact that you are doing it for a social purpose should be irrelevant to the tax man or woman. Okay, so, but I'm not a lawyer or an accountant. Those professionals, ask them. But say, I'm behind you all the way
Thank
for
you.
what that's worth.
Thank you.
And I'll visit you in jail, I promise. That's what my accountant says to me. Sorry.
Hi, great talk. You talked a little bit about more traditional forms of incorporating your business. You also talked about nonprofit, but could you talk a little bit more about cooperative forms of
B corporations,
yeah.
co-ops and that.
Yeah.
I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not the best person, and I wish I had Allison from last week sitting beside me. What I will say there is that there's a tremendous amount of change. On the conventional side, there's not been a heck of a lot of change in incorporation and the standard rules. On social purpose ventures, there's a lot of change in the works. And so my excuse is, if I'm not right on top of that, I could mislead you. Best thing to do is talk to the folks here at Mars at SIG, Social Innovation Generation, our social purpose arm. They are intimately involved in helping change those rules. So they know all of the latest nuances, not only what's there now, but what's coming up in the future. So rather than me make a hash of it, I apologize, I don't have an answer, but it is dynamic. And I think the good news is it's dynamic and it's getting much, much better because of the problems of the old systems.
Okay, so moving towards like a cooperative consumption model.
Moving towards B Corp and structures that exist in the States, structures that exist in the UK, but that Canada has not yet put in place. We are moving to getting those in place. So again, send an email to the course website, and we, right, San Maria, we can make a direct link into the right person at SIG to answer that, since I can't.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay.
You can send an email to entrepreneurship101@marsdd.com. Tony, we have a few questions coming in from online. So the first one is, as a founder, how should your time be allocated between sales and marketing and actual technical work?
Okay, I'm going to assume there's only one of you. That's a interesting challenge. You need to be doing, simple answer, as a colleague of mine once said, well, if you can't get your work done in 24 hours a day, you'll just have to start working nights. You should be doing both, and you will know how close do you think your product is ready, is to being customer ready. And if you think it's pretty close, you should stop and check with customers. Get that feedback, and if you say, actually, it's not, then shift back to getting it ready. You shouldn't go too far on, as I say, on buffing it and building the perfect thing and finding out it isn't quite what the market wanted. So, judgment call, how close should you always go out initially and suss out the market you know, if I could do this, who would be interested? And, you know, you get everybody, yeah, sure, I'm interested. Yeah, you never start without that knowledge. Then you go back and start building. But you're iterating. You should always be trying to stay in touch with the marketplace. That's what established businesses do. That's part of the job of the sales team. Constant feedback from the marketplace. You need to emulate that. And it's real tough as a one-person company. You know, there's no magic formula. You need to do both, and you'll kind of know, you know, keep an idea. How close am I to having what I think is saleable? Not when I'm there, when I'm pretty close, I need to double check with my customers. Because ideally, when I've got it market ready, I should know the top 3 people that I will go to and say, good, are you ready to cut a purchase order? Because here it is. If you're not ready, then you've gotten too out of touch with your customers. Okay, we'll take one from here and then go back, I guess, to the net.
What are the specific pros and cons of incorporating federally versus provincially, and do you recommend one or the other for startups?
I've never really found a huge distinction between the two. One, there is an issue in requirements for the percentage of your board that has to be Canadian. And to be honest, I can't really remember which goes which way. That's relevant when you expand and you want to bring in, say, some US or European or Asian board members to broaden the advice. You can get to a point where, whoops, I have to have a minimum of a certain number of Canadian directors. Actually, by the time you're at that stage, the worst that happens, well, we got to expand the board and throw on another Canadian to keep us on side. It's not that big a deal. And to be honest, I've never seen anybody sit down and say, I wish I'd incorporated in, you know, Ontario versus federally. And not a lawyer, but in more years than, again, I can't care to count in dealing with companies, I've never heard anybody say, you should do this, as opposed to that.
So the paperwork's comparable? And
Yes. Yes, as I say, I've only ever had an accountant do it, so I can't honestly say, but the bills aren't that much different, which is the telling thing. So back to the web.
We've actually run out of time, Tony, but
Oh,
maybe what we'll
okay.
do with the rest of the online questions is we can take these offline and answer them over the next few days over email.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.